Hi. 8 months ago, 3 tag societies came together to co-host this event. Cloud mobility and analytics. And from the word go, there's something a little bit different about what you're seeing and hearing today. We sent out emails, and within a week, we had over 40 people volunteering to help out. And over half of them are senior executives from some of Atlanta's most respected organizations. Then that list continued to grow over the next couple of weeks. And it validated a belief that I hold quite firmly, and it's the thought that Atlanta and Georgia has the most powerful technical ecosystem in the world. I know that's a bold statement. The way I define it, though, is the cadence at which our executives get together in person, voluntarily, to share ideas, help each other solve problems, or simply give back to our community in general. It's simply unprecedented. I call it the Southern way of doing business. You want proof? You just heard Tino. From his leadership, TAG has grown into the biggest technology association in North America, and it's one of the biggest in the world. In addition to that, there are community partners with things like the Georgia CIO Leadership Association, TechBridge, Society for Information Managers, and Women in Technology. Let's just pause there and say, the women of Atlanta rock. In addition to that, there are the business associations like the Chambers of Commerce. You've got Cobb, Gwinnett Chambers, Metro Atlanta Chamber, and the North Fulton Chamber of Commerce. And who knew? The World Chamber of Commerce calls Atlanta home. But what's different about this event? When I volunteered to chair this thing, I'm thinking, hey, it'd be a great way to geek out with people, learn about new technology and this next wave of technical innovation. And then I met a guy named Alan Loche, Executive Director of the Georgia Tech Research Institute. And on December 1st, he was giving a speech that literally changed the trajectory of my career and lit a fire in me. I learned 2 things from him. The first one is the video, which was so eloquently produced by Optimum Productions, respect. We're right on the cusp of the 4th Industrial Revolution. And the second thing that I learned from him, if you get your heads up and you look at who's leading this globally, it's not the United States. We led the 2nd Industrial Revolution, ushering in the age of mass production and the assembly line. We led the 3rd Industrial Revolution with computers in the automated factory. However, it's the Germans that are blazing a path into the future and ushering us into the age of smart factories and cyber-physical systems. Chinese paid attention. They now have Made in China 2025 announced last year, and if you strip away the rhetoric, it basically says, we have to follow the Germans. Then, just a couple of weeks ago, the Japanese came out, and after a 2-year incredibly exhaustive study, they too determined that they had to follow the Germans' lead. So, what I thought was another great TAG event has suddenly become a movement to galvanize leaders all across Georgia and to position us within the next 3 to 5 years as a global leader in technology. I know that's a rather bold statement. In fact, Jim Collins would call that a big, hairy, audacious goal. In 1962, JFK said the following: by the end of this decade, we choose to put a man on the moon and those other things, not because it's easy, but because it's hard. Honestly, I had no idea what that meant. Not because it's easy, because it's hard. I thought it was kind of dumb. And then last week, I went for a run in the woods. I'm trying to get back into shape, and it might have been the fresh air, the sweat, pulling the toxins out of my body, but randomly that quote popped into my head, and I suddenly got and completely understood what he meant by that. You see, in 1962, if you looked around the world at who could possibly put a man on the moon and safely return him back to Earth, there were only two possible contenders: the United States and the Soviet Union. And as a result of the great space race, two of the sexiest jobs in the world was astronaut and rocket scientist. My dad was a rocket scientist, and I remember as a kid thinking how cool that was. Well, to a much lesser extent, I think Atlanta and Georgia and the connectedness of this ecosystem uniquely positions us to be a leader, not because it's easy, but because it is incredibly difficult. Now, let's look at the United States. I had this great idea. I go rushing over to Alan. I had this, hey, listen, we have Georgia in this connected ecosystem. Why don't we galvanize our leaders, and in America, we'll position us as being that forefront of this next wave in innovation and position us. And you have to meet him. He's very quiet and unassuming. He laughed and he said, yeah, about that. The train left the station 2.5 years ago, and we missed it. New York, Chicago, Boston, Pittsburgh, Austin, Texas, and Silicon Valley are all leading in this. Just last month, I read a Forbes article that said Cincinnati, Ohio has declared themselves the Industry 4.0 test city for the United States. No offense, Cincinnati, but as I look around this room, the leaders that have gathered here today voluntarily, frankly, my dear, it kind of pisses me off. So the goal is this: how do we position Georgia to be a leader within the next 3 to 5 years? I think as a Roman philosopher Seneca who said that you make your own luck. In other words, preparation meets opportunity. Well, I think we've been preparing for this for about the last 20 years. And now it's time for us to steal a quote from the Atlanta Falcons, to rise up together and unite Georgia towards this effort, not because it's easy, but because it's incredibly difficult. And we're exactly the kind of ecosystem that can lead this charge. So where do you start? Many spirited discussions with the executive committee. We coalesce in two building principles: education and infrastructure. Starting with education, we've got an all-star panel of PhDs and industry experts. I'll let them talk about it. We'll just break it down. Their task is, in the spirit of the astronauts and the rocket scientists, and to paraphrase a quote from a Justin Timberlake song, their job is to bring sexy back to STEM education. Then, for the infrastructure part, something that very few people know is the story of Alpharetta. A little over 20 years ago, they're just farm country. And when the Corps of Engineers looked to build a city up there, some pretty smart people said, hey, wait, before you do that, let's dig underground and lay fiber cable. Because of that, Alpharetta is now home to hundreds of high-tech companies, generating thousands of jobs and billions of dollars to our state's economy. And what's the return on this investment for this hard work? Well, according to an IDC study a few years ago, they concluded that the Internet of Things on a global basis in 2013 was $1.9 trillion. And they projected by 2020 this would be a $7.2 trillion industry. Then one of our sponsors, Cisco, did another independent study and said that this would be a $14.4 trillion industry by the year 2022. It's a pretty big number. Now, breaking that down, that's about the size of the U.S. economy. What if we had just 0.1% of that number in Georgia? That would represent a net gain to our state's economy of $7 to $14 billion within the next 5.5 years. But that's 1/1000th of that. If you look at Georgia and our economy, it's over $500 billion. If you were to annex us from the United States and position us on a global stage, our total economy would be about 27 against other countries. And to say that all we can accommodate is about 1/1000th of that percentage is embarrassing. I think by rising together, we could achieve, dare I say, 0.5% or maybe a whole percent, representing a windfall of $70 to $140 billion to our state's economy. I'll end with this. In preparing, I met with just about anybody I could to get some advice and share some ideas. I'm in the floor of the Airwatch offices waiting to meet David DeBerry to get his thoughts on this. And while waiting, I happened to look up and I saw a poster of Mother Teresa on the wall with the following quote. And it said, "I alone cannot change the world, but I can cast a pebble into the water and watch the ripples roll across the shores." So on behalf of the IoT Planning Committee, I stand before you today and cast a metaphorical stone into the water. I can tell you honestly, thousands of hours and dozens of volunteers put this on. We've done our part. Now it's up to you to determine if those waves simply roll across the shores of this room and die out, or if they build momentum and continue to spread across the shores of our state, our region, the country, and the world. I choose leadership. Thank you.